Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to take a very close look at an important scene from the film Road to Perdition. And I also want to look at some screenshots, some individual frames from some other scenes in the film. And I want to talk about the way that Conrad Hall, the cinematographer, uses lots of elements of cinematography, but I want to focus primarily on the way that these shots and scenes are composed. All right, so the scene that I want to look at is, I have to say, probably one of my most favorite scenes in all of cinema. I think it's one of the most beautifully done scenes in film. This, of course, is the scene where Mike Sullivan, our main character, our protagonist, played by Tom Hanks, finally comes face to face with John Rooney, who is the Irish mob boss that began as a kind of father figure to him, but eventually becomes his nemesis because of various things. If you've seen the film, you know what happens. If you haven't, I don't want to spoil it. But he spends the better part of this story tracking down John Rooney, trying to essentially trying to kill Rooney for something that happened earlier to him and his family. And so, I guess what I want to say before we start watching this is that again, this film isn't really about the mob. It's not an action film. It's not even a revenge film, even though revenge is a significant motivator for our protagonist here. This really is a story about fathers and sons, real fathers and sons, like Mike and his young boy, Mike, but also the kind of father-son relationship that Mike and John have. And so that is what makes this scene so significant, and what makes John Rooney's final words here in this scene so emotionally powerful. So I guess what I'm saying is that this scene is not really about the action; it's more about the emotion. And so think about that as you watch. What I want to do is play this once for you, so you just watch it all the way through, and then I'm going to play it again, and I'm gonna talk about it.
I'm glad it's you.
Okay, let me just do something real quick here. I need to change the size of this. Okay. All right, let's watch that again. And I'm going to talk about what we're seeing here visually in terms of cinematography. Yeah. And I'll wait until they get out into the street. It's really when the good part of the scene starts. Okay. So one of the first things I guess I notice here is that we've got an extreme long shot, almost like an establishing shot. Whoops, let's go back. Let's do that again. And I'm gonna. This might continue to happen as I try to play and pause throughout this. But okay, so we have an extreme long shot, which essentially is just locating our characters, establishing the scene of action here. But also we get this really slow camera movement. I guess we would call this a crane shot or boom shot, as the camera moves upwards to again almost remove us from the action and place us establish the scene. Okay, now we get this, what I guess would be a full shot or master shot here of John Rooney here approaching the car, and he's surrounded by his bodyguards or henchmen, and so there's great visual balance here. We have the visual weight here of the car, and then of course the visual weight here of his bodyguards. Okay, now we get this medium close-up of Rooney, or medium shot, kind of somewhere between those, of John Rooney, and notice here that he is now kind of all by himself in this frame. Okay? His closest bodyguard pulls out of the frame. There it is. Okay, so the camera here is telling us what's important. Okay, it's focusing on what's important and it's directing our attention to what's most meaningful in this scene, which is Rooney's process of realizing what's going on. Okay, he's just seen that his driver is dead, and so it's a bit shocking and confusing and mysterious at first. But over the course of the scene, the reality of what's happening to him sinks in. Okay, and this is really the first moment where that realization is beginning for him, and of course that's why he's centered in the frame. His eyes are of course in the upper third. Okay, this is another great example of balance. We get this extreme long shot again of Rooney and his bodyguards, who are kind of dispersed evenly across the center of our frame. We get these great lines. Look at the lines kind of pulling our attention all towards the center. I'd say this is almost a symmetrical shot. The lines of the curbs, the lines of the roofs here on our buildings are all kind of drawing our attention towards the center of the action. Again, oops. He looks out to the blackness, and again, our eyes again are drawn visually by these lines toward the center, but we don't see anything yet. Mike's there, but he's in the shadows, so we are we're looking for something, but we don't know where it's going to come from. Okay, now pay attention here to the use of deep space composition. Okay, in the foreground we have one of his bodyguards. Okay, in the background here on the right we have another one of his bodyguards, and Rooney here is in the middle. Okay, now notice too, we haven't talked about lighting yet, but we will next week. But the way that Rooney here, because he is not blocked by an umbrella nor in the shadows, our attention here is kind of drawn to his face. Okay, this is great. This is an example of the way that a cinematographer can achieve balance through light and through color. Because his face stands out against all of this blackness, our eyes are drawn to that. And also that's helped out too by this light that's right above him. So visually, this light and his face stand in direct contrast to all of the other darkness, and that just helps this for the cinematographer to draw our attention to what matters here. Okay, but then watch what happens. The the bodyguard in the center is shot. Sorry, guys. Okay, here we go. The bodyguard in the center is shot, but we don't see his face. Okay, the camera is still kind of focused on Rooney. All right. This is a very important use of the push-in. Okay. Push-ins are often used to suggest epiphany, a realization. Okay. The character, something finally dawns on the character. Okay. And so here we get this slight low angle looking up at Rooney's face. And it has to be a low angle because he's kind of looking down, and so we need to see his full expression here. But the camera pushes in slowly to a close-up on Rooney, and that push-in is telling us, is visually communicating to us that he is beginning to understand what's happening to him, who is there, why his driver is dead, and who is shooting the gun. Okay? And also notice that he isn't turned around, he's not running, he's not looking for the gun. He is completely still in this frame. And so really the most important element of the story in this moment is what's happening in his mind. Okay. All right, now we get some important movement and use of deep space composition. The camera is this is kind of a truck shot. The camera is probably on a track moving horizontally through this scene, and as it moves, I'm going to back up here so you can see it again. As it moves, each of Rooney's remaining bodyguards are taken down one by one. Okay? But look what happens. Let's watch that again. Look where the camera's fixed on. Okay, so I mentioned this is a truck shot, but it's also a kind of 360-degree reveal because the entire time the camera seems to be focused on John Rooney. Okay? Watch that one more time. So the camera's moving, it's tracking the death of each of his bodyguards, but it's not focused on the bodyguards, it's focused on Rooney. Okay? So as I said, that this is a good example of deep space composition because what it's doing is it's combining the action, which is unfolding as the bodyguards are dropping, are being taken out by Mike, but it's also in the middle ground focused on Rooney. Right, and the whole time Rooney is just standing there, perfectly still. And also, what it's conveying to us is that Mike, who is shooting all of these bodyguards, he is saving Rooney for the last. Now, he's not taking Rooney out first, and Rooney knows this as well. He knows exactly what's happening here. Mike's a great shot. He's a hitman. He knows what he's doing here. He knows his way around a gun. So he is kind of expertly taking out each one of Rooney's bodyguards. So that he can save Rooney for the end. He can confront him like man to man or father to son, as it were, and that's conveyed through the camera movement there. So now we get, oh man, okay, let's try that again. So sorry. Okay. This is beautiful, beautiful composition here. So this shot stands in direct contrast to the earlier one where we saw, again, he was right next to the car, but he was kind of boxed in by his bodyguards, and so there was this great visual balance across the center of the frame. We don't get that anymore. All of his bodyguards are dead, and so now what we have is negative space. Okay, so there's probably a lot of reasons for this, a lot of effects of this. I think one is it just shows his vulnerability now. He's not protected by his bodyguards, but visually also it helps to kind of call attention to his isolation and his vulnerability, because now this negative space draws our attention even more to John here. Now watch this. Okay, Mike begins to emerge from the darkness. He's in the center of the frame. I knew that would happen just at that moment. So sorry. This is a subtle but brilliant use of the frame within a frame. Do you see it? Wait for it. There it is. Okay, frame within a frame. Rooney is in the background here, and because of that, he is very small. Mike is in the foreground, and because of that, he is very big. And remember what I said about the size. I don't know if I mentioned it on this video. I'm sorry, but the size of a character within a frame will often tells you something about their power or their importance in that shot. That's actually something that Alfred Hitchcock had once said. But the size of a character within a frame might correspond to their power or their importance within that scene. And of course, Rooney here is now rendered powerless, helpless. All of his bodyguards are dead. All of his hired guns are dead. Mike here has the upper hand. And as he walks towards Rooney, watch this frame within a frame. What I mean by the frame within a frame is that Rooney is kind of framed by Mike and his gun. Okay, this is the frame. Watch what happens here. You see how the frame slowly closes in on Rooney there? So sorry, guys. I know this is the frame. There it is again. The frame kind of slowly confines him more, boxes him in, and of course, this is suggestive of just how much control Mike has in this scene. This is another use of the slow push-in, the dolly in on Rooney. Rooney can hear the footsteps as Mike approaches. He knows who it is. He doesn't even have to turn around. He knows exactly who it is, why Mike has come for him, and the importance of this moment. He knows what's going to happen to him. Turns around very slowly. Now Mike comes into focus. We get this series of over-the-shoulder shots. This is kind of the final confrontation. Now again, Rooney's a father figure to Mike. He says, "I'm glad it's you." Mike has been a son to him. Okay, now I hope this doesn't cut out again, but the rest of this interaction is going to take place through these series of close-up shots. Okay. Oh, it did it again. Okay, let's try this one more time. So we push in on Rooney so we could see his face. We know that this is a moment of realization. Over the shoulder shot of Mike. Medium close-ups now to close-ups. Okay. So the use of close-ups here tells us that the importance of these shots, of this part of the scene, is on the character's emotions. Okay.
I'm glad it's you.
Now, the camera doesn't cut away from the close-ups. One last shot of Rooney, and then the gunfire. Now watch this. The camera doesn't cut away from Mike. The camera stays on a close-up of Mike to watch his eyes look down. That is incredibly important. Guys, if this was an action movie, okay, if the point of this scene was the action, then the camera never would have been focused on Rooney as all of his bodyguards were being killed. The camera would have had, it would have cut to all the different shots of the bodyguards going down. It would have cut back to Mike shooting. Okay, but the way that the camera moved and stayed focused on Rooney told us that the importance of this scene is on the emotional reaction, the emotional significance of the scene. And again, here, if this was an action scene, we would have seen Rooney go down. We would have seen his body getting riddled with bullets, but it never cuts away from Mike, because what's important about this scene is the emotional impact on the characters. Okay? Mike has been like a son to Rooney. Rooney's been a father to Mike, and Mike now has to kill the man that he had considered his father. And so instead of cutting away to a shot of Rooney being killed, it stays focused on Mike's face. Again, the camera is telling us what's important, and what's important here is the emotional impact on Mike. This isn't something Mike wanted to do. It's something that he had to do, and we can see that in Tom Hanks's eyes here. And then, of course, he looks away. What he's looking at here is all of the people that have witnessed what just happened. So you can see there why I love this scene. It's a moment of tremendous action, of violence, but the violence is downplayed in favor of focusing on the emotional meaning of that scene, because that's really what this story is all about. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about some earlier scenes, and just by looking at some shots. I mentioned earlier, or have mentioned, that this film is essentially a story of fathers and sons, and at the heart of this story is the relationship between Mike Sullivan Sr., who's played by Tom Hanks here in the background, and Mike Sullivan Jr., his son, who's here in the foreground. And for, I'd say, a good 50% to 60% maybe of this story, Mike and his son don't have a very close bond. And so, especially in the beginning of the movie, there's a lot of distance, literal physical distance between Mike and his son. And this is a great example of that. This is the first time that we meet Mike Sullivan Sr. He comes home from a day of work, and we know what his work is. He's essentially a hitman for John Rooney. We know what his work is, but his son doesn't know yet. His son doesn't know what his father does. So his father's kind of a mystery to him. His father is kind of distant, and we see that here in the way that this shot is composed. This shot is composed so that there's a tremendous amount of physical distance between the two characters. And that distance is exaggerated and emphasized by the frame within a frame. Okay? Hanks here is framed by the doorway, and he is, as it were, kind of in a different world. Okay, this doorway is symbolic. Doorways are often symbolic. They're almost like a portal, a transition from one experience to another, or one world to another. And so, for Mike Jr. here, his father is in a kind of different world. And it's a world he doesn't know, he doesn't understand. And he'll get glimpses of it as he sees his father put his gun down on the bed, but he doesn't know what it's for. So he doesn't really know his dad, right? So here again, we have a full shot here of Mike Sullivan as he begins to take things out of his pockets. And, oops. Sorry, guys. I don't know what happened there. Oh, here we go. Okay. Let's edit that out. Okay. Now watch also too, this is an element of blocking. Okay. Mike Sr. here, played by Tom Hanks, is positioned in this frame so that his son just sees him from the side. He only sees one side of his father, okay, and that's symbolic too. You can hear it right there. He only sees one side of him. The other side is hidden from view. Okay. Here is an extreme long shot of the same hallway, but now we're looking at Mike Jr., okay, his son. So his son here is, of course, framed by this other doorway. So he's in a different world from his father. So he and his father are, in a lot of ways, worlds apart. Okay. Now, just by contrast, here is Mike Jr. and his mother, and they are much closer, okay, in terms of their relationship, but also physical proximity. Okay. I mentioned just a moment ago that that Mike Jr. only sees one side of his father. Okay, this is how Tom Hanks's character is positioned in the frame for much of the beginning of the film, at least when his son is concerned. Okay, his son oftentimes only sees one side of his father. Here, look at this bottom right frame. This is really interesting. This is their dinner table. They're not positioned kind of equidistant from one another when they sit down and eat dinner. This is Mike Jr. And you see here how he's closer to his mother than he is to his father. This is to suggest and show the distance, the emotional distance between him and his father, and the emotional closeness that he has with his mother. And of course, this is really meaningful for later when his mother and his younger brother are killed. The only person he's going to have left is his father. And then, of course, the rest of the film is about how they grow closer together. I'll talk about that in just a sec. But again, I wanted to show this to you so that you could see the way that blocking is so important, the way that characters are positioned in the frame. Here, it's to show just one side of Mike Sr. Now, once Mike Jr. witnesses the murder that, of course, sets everything into motion, he witnesses this execution-style killing of another mobster, and then everything becomes clear to him. He knows what his father does. He sees the other side of his father, and of course now Hanks is turned to face his son. So we get this medium shot, or medium close-up shot of Hanks looking at his son, who's just seen his father kill people. But even here, half of Hanks's face is in shadow, and this is suggestive of kind of his good side and dark side, his good side and evil side. So even though he's facing Mike can see his father's face fully. Half of his face is in darkness. This is a much different shot. Here, look at the tone of this shot in terms of the color versus this shot. Hanks's face is a little bit more brightly lit. The colors are much warmer. But look how much closer he is to his son. His son's here in the foreground. So we get this over-the-shoulder shot. So the physical proximity, the physical distance between the characters has closed. They're closer together. This is later in the story when they've drawn closer together. They've formed a much stronger bond. Okay? And so that bond is communicated partly through the composition of the frame here. Okay. So that's really all I wanted to share with you at this point on Road to Perdition. I hope that was useful. I hope that was helpful and interesting to you. I hope you got to see the way that we can talk about scenes and shots using some of these terms. If you have any questions about what I've said here, feel free to email me or try to get me on a chat in the afternoons. Or if you have any further thoughts on these scenes or scenes I didn't talk about, I'd love to hear them, so you can email me those as well. All right, take care, guys.